Hello, my name is Sean Mullen. I'm with Surgent CPA Review. Joining me is Mike Deschamps from Maricosta College. Mike and I have known each other for about 5 years. And Mike, I would say it's safe to say you and I are both evangelists for the Enrolled Agent credential, right?
I would completely agree with that, Sean. As an educator at a community college, I can't tell you how important I think the EA certification is for my students who are looking for a career in taxation.
Well said. And, you know, Mike, you and I, in all the conversations we've had, one of the things we've talked about is the differentiator that an enrolled agent is versus just being a tax preparer, and why, if someone's going to take a career in taxation, they should go that extra step of being an enrolled agent.
Well, I think in today's world, Sean, you have a lot of students that are coming back to school, having worked in various jobs and maybe even having a degree in another area. And they're realizing perhaps that their original choice of profession wasn't giving them the opportunities that they needed. So clearly the enrolled agent path is such a dynamic way for people to get a foothold into the tax preparation industry without necessarily having to go through a long educational process that the CPA exam would involve.
Exactly. And an entry-level person learning to do the fundamentals of taxation, the 1040s out there, they could start and they could, after finishing up some kind of program at a tax school or at a local community college, they could walk out and be making $30,000 a year. But the enrolled agent is a much higher earning potential for all kinds of reasons. So why don't you talk a little bit about the earning potential and the up the ladder, if you will, that your career is when you are an enrolled agent?
Well, Sean, I'm in California, and unlike some states, we do have a certification that people must attain in order to do any taxes for a fee, and it's called the California Registered Tax Preparer. The problem with that is it really doesn't give you the full scope of taxation. Basically, people take a course that qualifies them on individual taxation, leaving out all the other areas of taxation that are so critically important to having what I would call a fully vested knowledge base in taxation. But the enrolled agent exam gives you that. I'm both a CPA and an enrolled agent, and I can tell you that on the CPA exam, yes, tax is an element of the exam, but when you talk about the enrolled agent exam, it is solely focused on tax in all areas of tax that someone is likely to meet in the practice of taxation. And you add to that the representation rights that someone that an EA has, and you really have all the rights and I would say perhaps even more knowledge than someone that's a CPA in terms of the full breadth of taxation, which obviously is going to make you much more marketable in terms of the tax industry.
And the thing is, Mike, when they're taking your individual taxation course there at Maricosta, they're already studying for the EA exam for part one, essentially, because that's the bones of what is the exam. It's individual taxation, debits, and the credits, the deductions, all the different schedules. All of that is a component of what is part one of the enrolled agent exam. So by the time a student has finished your class, I mean, they're well along their way to being ready for the exam. And what we're trying to do now with our part one of EA review that they're getting included with their text is, let's say they finish, their semester and it's, December or it's May, what have you. Take the next 2-3 weeks and actually bear down and study for the actual test. You have the mechanics down, but now let's teach you how to be a test taker and pass that exam. So we don't want students to think that, now that I've finished this semester of learning individual taxation, I have to start at the very beginning and study for this exam. They're already 75% there, wouldn't you say?
I would, Sean. In fact, I often tell my students that in our first class, the individual tax class, they're getting 70 to 75% of the content that is tested on the exam. That said, that other 25 to 30% of content is critically important because, you want to make sure that your students are getting a passing score on the exam the first time. And in addition to that, the level of question availability that you have in the Surgent review program, so that they can go back and they can look at the same topic and see that same question presented in 4 or 5 different ways, which I don't necessarily always have the opportunity to do in a classroom, is going to make them that much effective on the exam. I mean, I'm a CPA, as I said, and I took a CPA review class before I took the CPA exam, and that helped me immeasurably in passing that exam. When I sat for the EA exam, I also used review materials, and they helped, again, immeasurably in my passing the exam. So I think it's critically important that, this is kind of, I would describe it as the icing on the cake. You're well on your way by taking the tax classes at your college, but you need that last piece that is going to tie it all together. And I believe that the review class provides that.
Exactly. And the great thing is that with the partnership we're doing with McGraw-Hill, the students not only get part 1 for free for 6 months from when their semester starts, but we're also discounting parts 2 and 3 of the Enrolled Agent exam review course from Surgent. And we'll talk a little bit later about what's covered in those additional exam sections.
In fact, if you look at all of the big 4 firms right now and look at some of their management in the tax area, you are going to find a number of people that have the Enrolled Agent certification. And, that is something that has really only happened in the last 10 years. And I think that shows that, even though the Enrolled Agent certification has been around for a long, long time, people are finally realizing the tremendous value that this presents. And the big 4 firms, when they see value, they're going to jump on it. And that's why you see more people within their upper tax ranks having the EA certification.
Mike, you're a CPA and you're an EA. Let's talk about the differences between the two as far as the path to reaching that goal. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, as you see from the slide that we have up on the screen right now, and most accounting educators are well aware of this because, many of them are CPAs or, certainly advising their students about this path. With the CPA exam under the current regulations, you have to have the 120 units of the bachelor's plus an additional 20 units, 30 units rather, that don't necessarily need to be a master's degree. But we find a lot of people going the master's degree route in order to meet that. And also in some states, lower the amount of hours that they have in order to get their certification. And then in addition to that, you have to take the ethics exams and pass that. And then you have to have your work experience requirement. So there are a lot of hoops one has to jump through in order to become a CPA. Now, again, as being a CPA, I think that is a very noble path. But for many students today, that might not be the path that they want to take because of the time and the expense. And therefore, we look at the EA certification, where basically what you have to do is get your PTIN from the IRS, apply for the exam, pass the exam, pass a background check, and you are an enrolled agent. And so in terms of cost and time and getting a certification that is recognized within the profession as having a great deal of high value, it is a much more what I would call quicker path to get there than the CPA license. And again, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. There are people like myself that are CPAs and EAs, but for some of our students who are finding that, look, I need to get out there, I need to start working, I need to get into my profession, and I need to find a path that's going to allow me to do that in the most expeditious way possible, the EA is just a wonderful way to get there.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Enrolled Agent examination itself. It is 3 exams: individual taxation, corporate entities, and representation practice and procedures. Each exam is 100 questions each, 15 of which are experimental. They're not graded. And I've met thousands of people that have sat for the Enrolled Agent exam. Those experimental questions sometimes can really stand out, and they're experimental because they have no business being in the exam section that you're in. But the 3 sections: individual taxation, corporate representation. Individual taxation, we probably could all figure out what those are, Mike. That's the 1040, the deductions, the credits, exemptions, what have you. When you go into like corporate entities, what are we talking about there? Because this is probably the third rail of taxation that a lot of tax preparers don't want to talk about, which is the corporate side. But it really is, a very, very understandable concept, just like individual taxation is. So when they say corporate entities, what are we talking about?
Well, you're talking about a variety of things in terms of, you have elements related to C corporation formation, and the running of a C corporation, and also the closing down of the corporation. You have S corporations issues, flow through entities, partnerships as well. So it is, in my mind, and Sean, I think you would agree with that, it is the most challenging of the three parts of the enrolled agent exam, because it has the most material. You're dealing with, as I said, C corps, you're dealing with flow through entities, S corporations, and partnerships. And so there is a lot of material there. And I think that even when you have a corporate, or as we call it at MiraCosta, a business entities class, it's very, very difficult to cover all the content that would be covered on the enrolled agent exam. And so the review program gives you the opportunity to fill in the blanks of those things that you didn't quite have enough time to either not cover during the course of the semester or quarter, whatever the case may be, or really didn't go into the depth that you wanted to in order to make sure that your students were fully prepared for the exam.
And then part 3, representation, practice, and procedures. Obviously, we have Circular 230, which is sort of the guidelines of ethics for taxation in this country. It covers, the gamut that goes to Circular 230. So you're talking about things like what are the penalties with certain acts, and what is requirements for education and things like that. But it really, although it's kind of this part that nobody doesn't really touch that much in terms of their day-to-day work, it really is probably the most easily passable section of the enrolled agent exam. Wouldn't you agree?
Sean, I would agree with a bit of a qualification. Yes, I think it's probably the easiest in terms of you don't have a lot of quantification issues on that. What I mean by that, a lot of problems where you have to figure out a certain number, whether it be, okay, what's the basis of this transaction, or what's the value of this asset when you transfer it into an entity, things like that. But at the same time, there are a significant number of topics there that you've got to be familiar with. So you do have to spend some time prepping for it.
All right. So, Mike, you have enrolled agent exam prep at your school. There's no one way to do it, obviously. It can be done a number of ways, done through as a capstone, when they complete, let's say a sequence of, they do individual taxation, fundamentals of accounting, maybe a bookkeeping class, a corporate taxation class, and obviously an Excel class, a QuickBooks type of class is all part of that, some type of accounting program. But you could do it as a 4-credit class as a capstone. You can do it through continuing education. You can use your own faculty. You could outsource the whole thing if you wanted to. There's a lot of ways to do it. But what you and I have been able to do is talk to instructors and asking them questions about what their program is and what they want the outcomes to be. We've been able to help them custom make a program that fits the best needs of their school. So talk about why you put together the program the way you did at MiraCosta.
So, Sean, we decided to do, we decided to do our program through our continuing education department. And what that entailed was that we didn't want it to be part of the 4-credit program, because obviously one of our goals is to get people through our 4-credit programs as quickly as possible. So we partnered up with our continuation department, and using the Surgent review program as our base, we have a live instruction component that we incorporate into continuing education. So, we will have a 2-day session on individual, a 3-day session on corporations, and a 1.5-day program on part 3, which is preparer responsibilities. And so what we do with that is, when students come into the live session, when they sign up for the course, they're getting the Surgent review program as part of it. And then we come in and we teach live and talk about the key topic areas, what I would call the stumbling blocks, if you will, that we feel are part of each exam component. And in class, we'll go over that. We'll give some additional instruction. We'll have them practice a little bit on the software program that they're going to be using at home for home study. And we've found this to be a very effective method for preparing our students for the exam.
Right. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the actual course. So with the Surgent EA exam review that you're using at your school, we know there's a database of 1,700 multiple choice questions divided among the 3 exam sections, with it being highly weighted more on the corporate side. So again, that's the most difficult examination. So we want to provide more content there. But each one of our questions has a very detailed explanation and is referenced to the associated IRS publication, form, or instruction. What a lot of people aren't aware of, and even some review courses don't realize, is that the Enrolled Agent exam is based on these IRS publications. That's the foundation for this exam, right?
It absolutely is, Sean. And it is amazing that some people don't necessarily understand that. But if you go to the IRS website and you Google the Enrolled Agent exam and the information that they have there, and you look at what the IRS uses as their recommended study tools, they just bring up a number of publications. Now, that's all well and good, but most people aren't going to have the time to sit down and parse out what's important in each of these numerous publications that the IRS has recommended, and that's already what you've done for them.
We use an adaptive learning algorithm in the Surgent EA exam review. What we're doing is, as we feed students questions to the students initially based upon the weightings for an exam section. So like part 1 has 5 major categories that the IRS weights. So it's not an equal 20% per category. It's up and down depending upon the weighting. We give the students more questions that are in the higher weighted categories, but we calibrate that distribution of questions based upon their scoring. So as students start to show their tendency to do well in certain topics and not so well in other topics, the software adjusts the distribution of questions based upon where they're struggling more. And at the same time, what it also does is it creates reading reports that telling them for the questions they're getting wrong, which specific IRS publications to go to by page based upon the area that they're, or the question that they're getting wrong. And then the students can access all those pubs right from the course. Everything is right there at their fingertips.
You're absolutely right, Sean. And I want to bring in another point here. With the Cruz Fundamentals of Taxation book, published by McGraw-Hill, as we talked about, we have a function called Learn Smart. And Learn Smart is also using the algorithms to prevent very deep and comprehensive learning. And so the nice thing about the Surgent Review course is that our students that are using the McGraw-Hill materials are already used to that through Learn Smart. And so that becomes a very smooth transition for them in terms of a learning goal and a learning tool. And I think that that's a very big help for our students.
We offer a pass or refund guarantee that basically is very straightforward. We want you to answer every one of our multiple choice questions correctly at least one time. And we want you to average at least 1 minute per question so that we know if you're getting a question wrong, you're taking the time to read the detailed explanation and understand why the answer is in fact correct. And we're proud of the fact that with some 45,000 exam sections that we have sold, we've had to issue less than 50 refunds on our pass or refund guarantee and have not issued a single one in the past 2 years.
Last thing I'd like to point out, Sean, is that, just having the additional material for the Cruz book that the part 1 of the Surgent Review materials is going to provide is simply going to help you teach the class as well, because, I'm going to be tapping into that material to give my students a better understanding of topics that we're covering. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that they have to want to go on and take the Enrolled Agent exam. I have some students that come to me that just want to learn more about their own individual return, which is why they're taking the class. But still, that material that's going to be provided from Surgent is going to help me do a better job of doing that. So no matter what the student's goal may be, and obviously I'm a little bit biased, I would hope that their goal would be to think about a career in taxation and the enrolled agent as a possible culmination of that, that there is still going to be, from a pedagogical standpoint, a significant benefit of having this tool now aligned with the Cruz textbook.